Hello there, I'm Graham Blackmore. I've been teaching rebreathers for more than 20 years, firstly starting for INTD and now teaching for GUE. Behind me is the RMS Amazon, which lies in about 120 metres off Marlin Head in Ireland. You always have to expect the unexpected on a dive like this, and on this dive, a seal popped up to greet us. Quite surprising at that depth, as you can imagine. Anyway, in this video, I'd like to talk to you about failures when diving a CCR. And firstly, I'd like to apologise for my hat. It's COVID hair related and it's a bit cold in the UK at the moment. So, when we're diving CCR, try to stack the odds in your favour. And this pretty much means diving to prevent problems rather than dealing with problems when they happen. And it all starts with a good setup. So do your complete pre-dive sequence using checklists and following good procedures and make sure everything's working. Once you're sure the rebreather's functioning properly, you can get ready for diving, do your pre-breathe and get into the water. Remember that the surface can be as dangerous or perhaps even more dangerous because your brain's not really in dive mode yet as on the actual dive. And you should start behaving as if you're diving as soon as the loop goes into your mouth. So we're actually diving now. What we should do is follow the golden rule of CCR diving, and that means always knowing our PPO2. In addition to tracking our PPO2, we should also track things like decompression, gas consumption of both oxygen and diluent, as well as absorbent canister endurance remaining, and also, of course, the depth and time that we're actually diving. Don't forget the big A, awareness. That is key to a safe dive. Any dive in actual fact, not just CCR. Work on your diving skills so that they're second nature. It frees up mental capacity to see what's going on. That means looking out for potential problems, but also seeing the cool whale shark swim across you as you're diving. Never fight the sea. You'll never win in that battle. In fact, for cave divers, we can say never fight the cave as well. In reality, we mean don't fight the water. So fundamentally, we let the rebreather determine our workload, not we determine the workload and let the rebreather deal with it. That's a recipe for a bad incident. Don't force your rebreather to cope with high workloads and or breathing rates. Throughout the dive, focus on basic skills. The first thing we should consider when diving a rebreather is the loop volume. In GUE, we have a so-called optimum loop volume. Optimum loop volume will give us the best work of breathing and the easiest buoyancy control. If we strive to maintain optimum loop volume together with a constant dry suit volume, the only thing that we need to adjust will be the wing. So instead of having 3 balls to juggle, we only have 1, which is the wing as we change depth. Furthermore, with as little as possible gas in the counterlungs, it will make buoyancy control easier, as I said, but it will also allow the rebreather to control the PO2 better. Even when you're ascending, focusing on loop volume will make the ascents easier and stop the rebreather from working so hard to maintain set point with the solenoid constantly acting. So the last of our basic skills, coupled together with buoyancy and awareness, will be trim. Trim allows us to move efficiently through the water, which is something we really want in rebreather dives. Most importantly, a flat diver looks way cooler than a seahorse. So even if you dive well and have good practice skills, you still might encounter a failure. So we should have some procedures to follow in order to make dealing with them as safe as possible. In reality, what is needed is a standardized approach with well-practiced and simple procedures to follow at stressful times. We don't want to end up with analysis paralysis, or more simply put, Aesop's fable's tale of the cat and the fox. The fox. I know foxes are cool with their red and grey appearance, but the fox used to boast to the cat about how he had hundreds of responses to escape. The cat only had one, but when the dogs came, the dogs caught the fox as he could not decide which of his 100 escapes to use. The cat merely climbed the tree and got away from the dogs. So, I don't like to think about the poor untimely fox's demise, but it does give us an important lesson. So whenever dealing with any problems underwater, the first thing to be aware of is to relax. If you get stressed and your awareness closes in, it will make it very difficult for you to deal with the problem effectively. So keep your mind open and your eye on the big picture. One thing to bear in mind is the problem something that I've actually caused? Did I just smash the MAV or the ADV, or have I been holding my breath? Let's dispel this myth that the rebreather is trying to kill you. The rebreather is not a sentient being and is not trying to kill you at all. In actual fact, the rebreather only does one thing, and that is ask a question. What's the PO2? If the PO2 is below set point, it opens the solenoid to try and raise the PO2 up to set point. That's it. As you change depth or go deeper, the ADV may fire, but this is a mechanical operation, not computer driven. So in actual fact, the rebreather is trying to keep you alive. Don't forget its simple operational parameters. The problems with rebreathers come when you try and undo what the rebreather's doing and you start fighting each other. You're like a dog chasing its tail round and round again. Of course, the first and primary question to ask when dealing with any failures on the CCR is the PO2 safe, or is it rapidly changing towards unsafeness? And if it's not, then bail out. It's much better to be looking at problems from the safety of open circuit. Now we can get back to our Zen-like diving appearance, open the situational awareness again, and try to resolve the problem. Despite the complexity of the rebreather, we can actually categorize the failures into a number of groups: low PO2, high PO2, sensor discrepancies, handset failures, runaways, high carbon dioxide, water intrusion, and open circuit failures. I'm going to talk about each category now. Let's first start with low PO2. So again, the first question to ask is the PO2 safe, or is it rapidly changing? And if it is, I want to bail out. Then we're going to assess the situation. So stop and stabilize yourself, signal the team, and start to deal with the problem. So we can assess, is this something I've actually caused? Has the ADV just fired, and that is what is causing the drop in PO2? Or have I ascended a bit and again causing a drop in the PO2? We can perhaps spend a couple of seconds waiting to see if the solenoid will bring the PO2 back to what we're expecting. So assuming it's not something we've caused, we're going to follow the old diving mantra: stop, stabilize, and act. Of course, we want to signal the team that our PO2 is down and it's a problem. So when dealing with low PO2s, what we want to do is we want to flow check the oxygen pressure gauge, and then we want to check the MAV. That way we can tell whether the solenoid is blocked or not. Of course, if your oxygen's turned off, when you turn it back on, the PO2 will start to rise again. If the solenoid's blocked and you hit your MAV, the PO2 will again rise. So you can see that this simple procedure of checking whether the oxygen's turned on, if you have remaining pressure, and if the MAV's working, will deal with most low oxygen problems. If you've run out of oxygen or there's some other blockage, plug in offboard bailout. We'll cover that more in CCR2 classes. So let's summarize the solutions. We could bail out and end the dive. We could end the dive with manual control. We could plug in offboard O2, or we could have a semi-closed exit. So just a word from the wise, well, a word from me at least. If you maintain neutral buoyancy during the dive and you're at constant depth, yet you find yourself dropping, it should indicate to you that there's something going on with the oxygen addition. If you're at constant depth on the rebreather, the only change that will cause a reduction of buoyancy will be a lack of addition of oxygen to replace the oxygen that you're metabolizing. So now let's talk about high oxygen. Again, the question is the PO2 safe, or is it rapidly changing? Many people are worried about high PO2, but in actual fact, I'm more worried about low PO2. It's kind of like blood sugar. Low blood sugar will kill you very quickly, whereas high blood sugar will take days to cause effects. We should think the same about high oxygen. Of course, we want to avoid high oxygen, but it won't kill you instantly. If you got hypoxic, you could pass out and drown very quickly. So the thing about high oxygen is it's probably going to be combined with excess buoyancy. We should work to come into a head-up trim, and then we can vent excess volume from our mouth whilst we're dealing with this problem. We'll talk a little bit more about this in Runaways as well. Anyway, assuming it's not a problem that we've caused, either descending or heavy addition of oxygen, what we should do again is stop, stabilize, and then act whilst signaling the team: high PO2. So what we can do here is we can dill flush down high PO2, or we can actually turn off our oxygen to stop the flow of oxygen into the loop, causing the elevated PO2. Once we've turned off the oxygen, we can disconnect the MAV, and then we can slowly try and turn the oxygen on again. With the MAV disconnected, we can tell whether the flow of oxygen into the loop is either from the MAV or the solenoid. Don't forget, if you turn your oxygen off, you've turned the rebreather into a death trap, so be very mindful that a rebreather with no oxygen is very dangerous indeed. So what are the potential solutions? We can bail out and make our exit. We could have a semi-closed exit where we've turned off the oxygen but we're maintaining PO2 with our diluent and or deco gases. We could try feathering the valve in the case of a stuck solenoid, or if it's a stuck MAV, we can disconnect the MAV and we can let the solenoid manage the PO2 for the exit. The last thing that we could do with a stuck solenoid is to plug in the offboard O2 and then make an exit with manual control. So again, just like low PO2, your buoyancy will tell you a lot about what's going on with the loop. At constant depth, if you find yourself rising, it could indicate some excess flow of oxygen into the loop. So buoyancy control will be your friend. Of course, it could be the ADV, in which case the PO2 will tell you which of the two is being added to the loop unwantedly. Is that a word? Here I just want to give a simplified approach to cell discrepancies rather than going into the subtleties of each type of cell discrepancy. Let's just have a procedure for when cells disagree with each other, and I can talk about the different kinds of cell discrepancy in another presentation or during a class you might do with me. Again, the first thing we ask ourselves is the PO2 safe or is it rapidly changing? One thing to bear in mind here is that we should take the worst case. So take the most dangerous cell reading. Even if two are in agreement, if one is dramatically hypoxic or hyperoxic, then we treat that as the worst case, and that might cause us to bail out even though the other two cells are reading perfectly normally. So once we've answered the initial question and bailed out if necessary, again, stop, stabilize, and signal the team. It's probably a good idea to switch to low set point. If the diluent PO2 is below the set point, when you flush, the solenoid won't act and you can get an accurate reading of what the diluent PO2 is and use this to verify what the cell readings are. You may also consider a one-handed dill flush, as a two-handed dill flush like I'm doing here will stop you from being able to see the PO2. So what we can do is tip our left shoulder slightly down and forward and then pull the counterlung dump. That will trigger the ADV, and then you can watch the PO2 as the ADV is firing. So what are our solutions for cell discrepancies? What we can do is we can do a dill flush to verify which of the cells is reading properly, and then depending on the particular situation, this may cause us to bail out, or it may cause us to make a low set point exit, or we might actually choose to manually control the oxygen so that the solenoid doesn't get too crazy with those disagreeing cells. Sometimes, for example, in a failed temperature compensation board, we might see a consistent discrepancy between one of the cells. Then we can possibly think that perhaps the naughty cell is 0.2 off all the time, and we might be able to make a controlled exit whilst carefully watching to make sure things are consistent. Can also make a semi-closed exit, in which case the diluent will be maintaining set point, and then we're less concerned about the solenoid getting crazy with incorrect cell readings to decide whether to open or not. As I briefly talked about at the start of this slide, be extremely mindful of combined failures. If you get a voting logic error combined with two cells being current limited, that could be extremely dangerous. We'll talk more about cell limitations in class or in other videos that I'll make. So another group of failures, the handset failures. This can be caused by the handset flooding, cable being cut, the batteries running out, or some other factor causing the display to actually turn off. With the CAN bus design, when the system loses communication with the controller, the solo board in the head will actually maintain set point at 0.7. Or I should say, the solo board should maintain set point at 0.7, We should never rely on this, and in actuality, we should never rely on the handset to control the PO2 either. We always have to be alert and know what's going on in our loop. So, if we've lost the handset, we still have the PO2 reading on the HUD, and that can allow us to make a manual exit at a higher set point than what the solo should be maintaining at 0.7. So just a word of caution. So when we ascend on manual control with no assistant from the solenoid, we need to be particularly mindful to keep an eye on the PO2. Now your metabolism and the reduction in pressure are both acting to lower the PO2 in your loop. It's very easy to go hypoxic on ascent without addition of oxygen. So like I said, be careful. So now let's talk about runaways. We can have oxygen or diluent runaways. Basic procedure will be the same for both of them, and that is to maintain a head up attitude, and then we can vent extra volume from the loop from our lips. Our handset will tell us whether it's diluent, in which case the PO2 will drop or be maintained, or oxygen, in which case the PO2 will rise up. And then we can shut down the right post in the GUE system to stop the flow of gas to the ADV, or we can shut down the oxygen, which is again on the right side. The good thing about both the ADV and the oxygen being on the right side means that we can dump from the wing as necessary. Try to break open circuit habits where you flop forward a little bit to dump from the wing. Remember, it's not the wing that's overinflating, it's the loop. And therefore we need to maintain that head up attitude to make this the highest point, thus we can vent the extra volume. If we tip head forward, now the back of the counterlung is the highest point, and we can dump from the counterlung, but this uses our right hand that we need to shut the diluent or the oxygen, so we're actually snookered. So keep that head up attitude, vent the extra volume, shut down or shut down. So with the diluent, there are some things to be mindful of. The first is the right post is our source of buoyancy control and the ADV. So when you shut down the right post, you've actually lost all your sources of buoyancy. Of course, you could compensate a little bit by adding to the dry suit, or you could even add a little bit of oxygen just to stop the loop volume decreasing too much. But you need to be extremely mindful of what's going on. Shutting down the right post in mid-water with poor awareness is a recipe for a rapid descent to the bottom, potentially with the rebreather flooding when you pull the loop out, or you manage to bail out properly, close the loop. But now the ADV membrane will be the weak point, and as you descend with no replacement of volume, that ADV membrane can rupture, totally flooding the rebreather and sending you further downwards. So when we talk about diluent, we're probably not worried about hyperoxia, but low PO2 diluents in shallow water and runaways are asking for problems with hypoxia, so be extremely cautious in the hypoxic zone. So let's talk about oxygen. So of course, with oxygen flowing into the loop causing a runaway, the PO2 is going to dramatically increase, potentially to very high levels. However, our first priority is going to be dealing with the excess volume. So we can vent the extra volume, as I said before, from our lips as we shut down the oxygen. This will take a few seconds, and in this time, any exposure to oxygen probably won't result in problems with hyperoxia. Once we've shut down the oxygen and dealt with the initial problem, which was the excess source of volume and therefore buoyancy and potential explosive ascents, we can then think about the PO2. At this point, we can bail out because of high PO2s, or even dill flush them down if they aren't too extreme. Remember, if you've turned off the rebreather, it's now no longer functioning as a life support device. So if you go back onto the loop or stay on the loop, the PO2 will drop and eventually you will go hypoxic and drown. So just one last reminder about that head up attitude. That is the key to dealing with these problems and not looking forward to dump from the wing. Consider this is a loop problem and therefore head up so that we can vent. So let's talk about hypercapnia or problems with carbon dioxide. This is perhaps one of the most worrying things about diving a rebreather and something that's difficult to prepare for every eventuality. So we try and stack the odds in our favour. Start with an extremely well packed canister and with fresh sorb for every tech dive. Check your flapper valves to make sure that the gas is flowing correctly in one direction. The old headphone check will help you here at the start of the dive, but even during the dive you can pinch alternating sides of the loop and feel where the gas is flowing. One of the key things to carbon dioxide is going to be keeping your workload sensible. So scooters kind of become mandatory when we start diving deeper, particularly with multiple cylinders. We can also help the scrubber a bit by choosing low density diluents. Low density diluents are not only fun for the squeaky voice factor, but they keep our work of breathing low as well as the scrubber efficiency as high as possible. That sounds like a win-win-win situation to me. So one nice thing for you to do is to make a note of how many breaths you normally take per minute. Usually this is in the range of 3 to 5 breaths every 15 seconds. That equates to about 12 to 20 breaths per minute. Check to see what your normal breathing rate is when you're diving, and then periodically check that you're falling within these norms. It might just give you an early indication of impending carbon dioxide problems. Lastly, work on good form. Good form means neutrally buoyant and flat trim. Therefore, we can move around in the water as efficiently as possible and not cause problems with overworking, because we're working hard to compensate for negative buoyancy or poor body position. One nice thing about the GUE system is we can carry plenty of gas in our double tanks mounted behind us. With the addition of scooters, we can carry up to 5 aluminium 80s coupled together with our back gas, and that can give us a large amount of gas to deal with many problems, including extra stages of bottom gas and plenty of decompression gas for our ascent. Of course, as the dives get longer and exposures greater, we can start to think about incorporating better and better surface support, and this can include divers coming to meet us, bringing extra gas, or taking empty bottles or unused bottles of us to make the decompression safer and more enjoyable. One of the key things to get straight in our mind is never to be afraid to bail out, get off the loop and assess things from open circuit. That's the reason we carry so much open circuit gas, so that we're not worried about switching off the loop and taking something called a sanity breath, for example. It's much better off to be safer, go on to open circuit, assess the situation, maybe a false alarm, but keep it in your mind. I'm not worried about how much gas I'm carrying, I've got plenty, and therefore you're not likely to stay on the loop for too long and run into problems. So now let's talk about water intrusion. We want tight lips. Tight lips are going to be key to keeping all those little gurgles out of the loop. Generally, a little bit of water in the exhale hose is just going to make you annoyed. It's not going to cause any real problems, but if you've got really loose lips, you can completely fill up your exhale cantilline, and then the water starts working into the scrubber canister, and that's when it can cause problems. One great failure that's often overlooked is a small hole in the mouthpiece. You don't pick that up in your pre-dive leak checks, and it's only when you get in the water and constantly got that gurgle, no matter how many times you clear the loop, that you know that you've forgotten to check the integrity of the mouthpiece. Make it part of your pre-dive sequence to check the mouthpiece carefully for small pinhole leaks, because even a small pinhole can lead to a very uncomfortable dive. So of course we should learn and practice those loop clearing techniques, whether we stretch or shake or compress. The thing you want to do is to find a procedure that you can do effectively to clear water from that exhale side of the loop. Once it's in the exhale cantilline, as long as the volumes are kept small, it can sit there and not really causing any problems. Anytime you think you've got water in the cantilline, again, like the Runaways, maintain a head up attitude. This is often the hardest skill for GUE divers. They've spent their whole dive career up to this point being hammered by instructors and classmates and teammates to keep flat, and now we're asking them to maintain a head up attitude. So one little trick you can use whilst on a scooter, you don't even have to stop the dive. If you do a barrel roll, you can roll water into the exhale cantilline. Be mindful of doing too many barrel rolls though, because you could actually roll water back into the canister. So as you learnt in CCR1, it's entirely possible to recover a fully flooded loop, or at least any water in the exhale loop and the exhale cantilline. In fact, once it gets into the canister, it's very difficult to get out. You should practice flood loop recovery as much as you can to make it second nature. One day it might just save your bacon. Key things to remember in recovering a flooded loop are to keep that head up attitude and then to dill flush the water out through the counterlung dump. It's important that you keep a head up attitude when doing this so that all the water runs to the bottom of the counterlung. Once the water's in the canister and starts mixing with your softened lime, it makes a very effective anodization removal solution. Notwithstanding that, the water could eventually work all the way through the scrubber bed, compromising it and potentially ending up in our inhale loop, which is not a very nice place for it to be. So if water enters the inhale side or works its way all the way through the canister into the inhale side of the rebreather, we have a risk of caustic cocktails. Caustic cocktails are not much fun at all, and nowhere near as much fun as cocktails like mojitos, for example. So with caustic cocktails, be extremely cautious. If you get that caustic solution into your lungs, it can lead to very big health problems. Be cautious of any water at all in the inhale side of your loop. If you are unfortunate enough to have a caustic cocktail, rinse your mouth thoroughly with fresh water and seek medical assistance if it's bad. So quite a large component of the rebreather is actually open circuit, and of course we can get open circuit failures just like diving twin sets or even single tanks. You should follow the open circuit procedures you've been taught, for example in Tech 1 or Cave 1. Just be mindful, with a right post failure you lose all sources of buoyancy, the volume in the loop and your wing inflator. But with a loss of diluent, you can still make a CCR ascent. If you're good, in actual fact, you shouldn't need to trigger the ADV or use the wing at all on ascent, as you're only getting rid of excess volume, probably by exhaling from your nose and dumping from the wing. We can run into problems with the open circuit components of the oxygen supply. This might mean that we run out of oxygen or we have to turn the oxygen off. Now bear in mind that the rebreather is no longer functioning properly and we probably have to bail out and go home, or we can make a semi-closed ascent, or if we're doing a dive carrying an oxygen bottle, we can plug in that oxygen bottle and use that to make a manual exit. So one thing to bear in mind with your oxygen regulator, and this is actually an open circuit failure, is to check the interstage pressure. If the interstage pressure increases too much, this could block the solenoid. Remember, the solenoid is an upstream valve, and therefore it needs to overcome the pressure of the regulator to open. Therefore, if the pressure is too high, the solenoid can't open. Some brands are worse than others for creeping, so keep an eye on that interstage pressure. So one thing to bear in mind is that the flexible manifolds in the GUE system are particularly prone to failures. That's one of the reasons we've got two isolators, and it's another reason why I favour the hard tubing solution. So here we are at the end of my presentation, and actually at the end of the RMS Amazon. I can't wait to go back there again. I'm fingers crossed for this August 2021. I also can't believe the Royal Navy sent this 160 metre, 10,000 tonne displacement ship to war with this tiny little pea shooter on the back of it. It's no wonder she didn't fare very well when coming into contact with enemy U-boats. So thanks for your attention and making it this far. If you've got any questions, you can use the comment section, or you can reach out to me on Facebook or Instagram or any other way you have contacting me. Keep an eye out for more videos that I'll be making, and you may even consider subscribing. At least keep my mum company on the subscriber list, please. Anyway, dive safe. Woo!